Hi, virtual students. We are here with Unit 3, Part 3. Your notes for this are going to, you should have this page open. You'll fill it in as we go. What we're talking about is really competition within industries and what that competition means both for the businesses and the consumers. Starting you off here with, the first daily blog, go ahead and get your answer. Type in what you have. Now, what we want to know is here, remember, there's a difference between what we call profit and revenue. Okay, so company B has a much larger profit for that particular year. Company A obviously brings in a whole lot of money. We call that, like I said, revenue, but their costs are very, very high. So again, it's not necessarily how much money you make, that flat number, 150,000 versus 5 million. It's how much you make on top of the costs. Okay, so understand those two different terms. Sometimes um, they get used in ways that we may not necessarily think are very obvious when we hear some things. Okay, so as a business, what we've got to understand about them is their number one goal is going to be to make a profit. Okay, and we're eventually going to produce where that profit is maximized. As we mentioned, profit is different than revenue. And our simple formula for profit is we can take the revenue minus costs equals our profit. Okay, so it's a pretty simple formula. Now, maximizing revenue and decreasing costs, we can be creative and do that a whole bunch of different ways. But those are the only two things that go into this final profit that we eventually obviously want to maximize. Now, some things, and maybe my list isn't all inclusive, but some of your costs include your labor, your wages for your workers. You've got the materials you've got to buy to produce things, shipping costs, any upgrades to machinery or buildings or whatever. You've got taxes in there. And then we also have some things that we may not think of off the top of our head, like advertising and things like that, that go into our costs. So minimizing those things as much as we can. Again, there's a bunch of creative ways to do that. So, keeping those costs in mind and knowing that revenue is simply the amount of things that we sell times their price, okay, we can only maximize our profit with two variables, okay? So, we can either increase our revenue, there's only two ways to do it. How do I maximize or increase how much money I bring in? Well, I can either sell more stuff, okay, or I can charge a higher price and sell the same amount of stuff at least in terms of those types of things. Obviously, those things are easier said than done in some cases, right? If I'm in a very competitive industry, let's say like fast food, and I'm McDonald's and I double my price, people are going to stop going there. So charging a higher price isn't necessarily an option for everybody. Obviously, also selling more, how do we figure out how to do that? Well, obviously, we want to try to create a quality product, right? In McDonald's case, sometimes they produce new items on the menu, right? Obviously, they advertise, which adds to the cost, but they advertise trying to get people to get into the store also. And on the side of decreasing costs, there's a couple different ways we can do that. And again, you could probably be more creative than what my list is here. We can hire fewer workers, we can pay workers less, we can buy cheaper materials, we can upgrade materials such as machines, we can become more efficient, right? Um, and again, we can decrease costs from advertisements or things like that. Some of those things are in our control, some of those things are not. But at the end of the day, there's only a few different ways to decrease our costs. Obviously, the price of property and the price of taxes that I pay, that's kind of set in where my building is, right? So some of those things are a little bit out of our control once we get the business going. Obviously, you would do an analysis before you started a business on what those costs would be. But it's a pretty simple formula, right? Making that formula work, though, is obviously a little bit more difficult. All right, our second one here. Go ahead and pick one of these four businesses to um, that you think would be favorable conditions to start a business. All right, so all of these, and before I would were to read your answers, all of these have some advantages. So usually the most common answer is going to be babysitting. All right, and usually we get into like unique clothing, and then it goes like kind of a tie for third and fourth or whatever between the video game store and the video and the music store. And so the positives of the babysitting are usually pretty obvious. I can set my prices, right? I don't have any competition. I can charge people more money because it's something that they want. The clothing industry, extremely competitive, but it also has the largest market, right? I can sell my clothes to anyone, anywhere on the planet, okay, if they're willing to buy it. Now, with the music store and the video game store, kind of the same thing with clothing even, we know that there's a market for those things, right? And sometimes you could use other competition as an advantage. Hey, that store isn't necessarily very good. Maybe I can get into that store or that industry, sorry, and do some things better, right? I can steal some customers. And so there's positives and negatives of all these. I would say the negative of babysitting is your market is probably the smallest of all these, right? You can only travel so far. You can only have people travel so far to come and utilize your services. On top of that, too, not everybody needs babysitters, right? If you don't have a young child, you're not in demand for a babysitter, right? Whereas we know everyone wears clothes. We do limit it to teenagers. We know lots of the percentages of people listen to music. We know a lot of people play video games, and so those are some things to take into account as you're going into that particular question, which there's no wrong answer, but you should have some answers that say the positives and negatives that I mentioned there. Okay, so as we analyze how much competition are within businesses, we've got four characteristics. Number of producers, pretty straightforward. We're going to look at how many there are. How similar are the products to each other? Are they identical? Are they pretty similar? Are they very different? And those are the answers you'll say. Like you'll say they're pretty similar, or they're very different, or they're identical. Like there's kind of some gray area potential in some of these answers. So don't be afraid to just be able to explain how you feel. Is it easy for us starting a new business that will compete with existing businesses? What are the startup costs? How difficult is it to start that business? And obviously, we can analyze that with how many competitors there are. For example, easier, cheaper to start a restaurant as compared to starting a cell phone company, right? And so those are some things that go into those barriers. And then the control over prices is, can I raise my prices and still have people buy the same amount of my stuff? Okay, so again, not always a black or white answer. We've got some gray area in there where we can say, well, they can probably raise it a little bit, but not a ton. That's an okay answer. We want to, again, be confident in what you are analyzing. Okay, so the first market structure we're going to talk about is perfect competition. The characteristics are listed there for you. The big keys are the ones that I have stars written in. Okay, so we've got identical products and we've got no control over prices since those are identical. Now, the examples of these, the best example that you would probably be most familiar with is going to be on Amazon, right? So if I know exactly what I'm going to buy, so let's say I was buying a specific video game off of Amazon, right? I'm going to go on there and it's going to list for me the cheapest prices. Now, even on Amazon, these sellers become unidentical. So it's not a perfect example of perfect competition all the time on Amazon because they've got some ways that they differentiate from each other. They've got their seller ratings and they also have their shipping time and sometimes their shipping costs too. Okay, but usually they get ordered in the way that's what's going to be cheapest anyway. Okay, and so you are getting the cheapest price possible, and as long as everything's the same with competitors, I know that when I shop on there sometime, if it's going to be a week of shipping cost, a week of shipping delay, I'm gonna pay an extra dollar to buy certain things if I want those things as soon as possible, right? Same thing with seller ratings. If I have a seller rating of 50%, I don't want to have to deal with that. What made it be 50%? So I'm going to buy it from a seller that is a little bit more reputable in those cases. Now, here's the thing: when we talk about the profit formula for this perfect competition, is these businesses cannot raise their price to raise their revenue, right? Because if they raise their price, the customer is going to go somewhere else. Okay, so they have to decrease costs to increase their profit. Okay, and how do you do that? They have to be more efficient. They can, whatever that means, whether it's having machines do work, whether it's hiring fewer workers and getting the same amount of work done. That's the only way that they're able to increase their profit in those particular cases. All right. The big key, like we said, identical products, pretty easy to compete. Again, if you've shopped for certain things on Amazon, you know that there are dozens, if not, hundreds of different competitors selling similar products at certain times. Um, Easiness to compete is not the same as being an ultra successful business. Alrighty, so again, easy to compete in the fact that I can sell a product on there. It doesn't necessarily mean that my business is going to be super successful. Good for us because we have a lot of options and we get as fair of a price as possible. Just another quick example of on Amazon, looking at this part right here. Alrighty, they are trying to differentiate themselves, right? So you're buying something, and this was for a lint roller, okay, which I got this from a friend, so not necessarily from personal experience, but obviously this company wants some positive reviews. So they're saying 5-star rating, get 15 bucks. You got to include some text. 5-star rating, 50 words and 2 pictures, 20, video, 30 bucks. So they're trying to get their ratings up so people are willing to buy their product instead of someone else's. As we mentioned, it forces producers to be as efficient as possible, and consumers don't pay more than it's worth. All right, we're going to move on to Unit 3, Part 4 here, okay? And we're asking you to list these differences between the following name brands. Alrighty, so what we're getting into is now how businesses compete when they have some differentiated products. iPhone versus Samsung, they have some very slight differences. Right now, it's about how many cameras are inside the phone, right? Different lenses, those types of things. The operating systems are slightly different, those types of things. Even the colors of the phone, obviously, is ways that they compete. Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime, any of those streaming services, some have ads, some don't, some have specific shows. Nike, Adidas, Under Armour, same thing. They have different qualities, they have different styles. Um, and on top of that, too, they probably also have their products endorsed a lot more often. So again, sometimes we don't buy the product; we buy the product for who is wearing it in terms of those things. Okay, so moving into this monopolistic competition as it's referred. So notice we're going to talk about monopolies later, but this is monopolistic competition. I put a star in the important box here. Okay. Similar products that have unique aspects. We use the athletic shoe industry. Okay. So, there's unique aspects about those shoes. Very similar. Okay. Same thing with fast food. Very similar. I'm going to get fast food for lunch, right? Well, I like variety. Fast food restaurants try to do something a little bit better or something different than everywhere else. Arby's does not have monopoly power in the fast food industry. Where their monopoly power is in their roast beef sandwiches or their curly fries or their mozzarella sticks. And so again, very similar selling sandwiches, but they've got some unique aspects to them. Okay. Usually we have several producers, usually somewhat easy for a business to compete. If you look at just where I live in Elkhart, you have some very, very large global businesses, McDonald's, Burger King, Taco Bell. And then you have some locally owned places, Volcano's Pizza, Ricky's Taqueria, where people would rather go there for lunch than go get fast food in a lot of cases. And so able to compete even though they're not extraordinarily, globally popular. Since there's so much competition, we really don't have too much control over our price. If McDonald's raised their prices by 30 cents on a sandwich, people might not notice. If they raised it by $2, people are going to notice and they're going to decide to go somewhere else. All right. They've got to be what businesses need to do. They've got to be more creative in their quality of their product, their service of their product, because they can't use pricing. We like this as consumers because we have a lot of choices, prices are kept low, and we like that variety. And so, anyway, on top of that, too, businesses are forced to innovate, right? And as we kind of mentioned earlier, businesses coming up with new menu items to stay on the fast food topic. Those businesses trying to develop new things, faster ways to serve people, right? And so, anyway, um, this is a very, very common market structure that we see very, very, very often. We started describing what's referred to that non-price competition, right? There's so many similar products. I have to figure out different ways to compete. I mentioned these. Obviously, physical characteristics, you can throw taste onto there too. Service, right? We've probably all gone to a fast food place and left because the line looked too long. Location's important. Are they going to get a lot of traffic? And we can throw status and image in there too. We talked about that with the shoes a little bit. If I have my favorite player's pair of shoes, right, it makes me feel a little bit better about myself and those types of things. In fact, some cases we can raise our price when we can convince consumers that that product is superior to other products. That is what I have for you today. We will talk soon. Email me with questions. Keep up with doing the work and take care.